You open your drawer to grab a pen, and your hand skips right over the pack of disposable Bics. You reach for the brass one, the heavy one, the one that costs $30 and makes a soft click when you retract the tip. You tell yourself it writes better, and maybe it does, but that is not why you bought it. You also own a $10 toothbrush that vibrates and tracks your brushing habits. Your coffee grinder has ceramic burrs. Your winter coat is from a brand that people in cold places recognize. And every single one of these items has a cheaper version that would technically do the job. Yes, you have done the math, but you bought the expensive one anyway. And if you're honest with yourself, you have done this hundreds of times. This looks like waste. It looks like status seeking or marketing manipulation or just having more money than sense. But it is none of those things. What is actually happening here is something far more interesting, and once you see it, you will stop apologizing for the nice scissors. Let me explain what is really going on. First, let me say something you probably need to hear. You are not bad with money because you bought the expensive version of a cheap thing. You are not undisciplined. You are not falling for corporate tricks. Your brain is not broken. In fact, your brain is doing something quite smart. It is trying to protect you from a very specific kind of pain that most people cannot even name. Take a breath. This behavior makes perfect sense. Here's the first reason people do this. They are not buying quality, they are buying freedom from future failure. Think about the last time you bought a cheap version of something that mattered. A luggage bag from a discount store, a phone charger from a gas station, a kitchen knife that came in a set of 12 for $15. Remember what happened next. The suitcase wheels snapped on the first trip. The charger stopped working after 3 weeks. The knife went dull after cutting a tomato. And in that moment, you did not just feel annoyed, you felt something worse. You felt like the failure was yours, like you should have known better. The small amount of money you saved was not worth the humiliation of standing in an airport with a broken bag. That feeling is what you're actually buying your way out of when you choose the expensive version. Behavioral economists call this anticipated regret, but that makes it sound abstract. Here's what it really feels like. You're standing in a store or scrolling a product page, and your brain runs a tiny simulation of the future. In one future, you save $20. In the other future, you spend $20 more. But your brain doesn't stop there. It also simulates the moment of failure, the cheap handle breaking, the cheap sole peeling off, the cheap battery dying at the worst possible moment. And your brain says, I would rather lose $20 than feel that feeling again. You buy the expensive one, not because it's better, because you're terrified of being let down. This is not irrational. This is your memory protecting you. Every cheap thing that ever broke on you was stored somewhere in your body, and now when you reach for the nicer version, you're not being extravagant, you're being careful with your future self's dignity. Here's the second reason. Expensive versions of cheap things often function as a signal you send to yourself, not to anyone else. There's a famous idea in psychology called signaling theory. Most people think it's about status. You buy a luxury watch to show other people you have money. But that's only half the story. The more important signal is the one you send to yourself. When you spend $30 on a pen, you're not telling the world you can afford it. You're telling yourself that your thoughts matter enough to be written down with something that feels good in your hand. When you buy a heavy cast iron pan instead of a non-stick disposable one, you're telling yourself that cooking is an activity worth taking seriously. The object becomes a mirror, and the reflection says, I am someone who values the small moments. This matters more than we admit, because most of life is made of small moments. Brushing your teeth, making coffee, writing a note, opening a can. And if every one of those small moments involves a tool that feels flimsy, loose, or disappointing, you start to feel something underneath. You start to feel like your life is made of flimsy things, like nothing quite works the way it should, like you're always making do. That feeling, accumulated over months and years, becomes a quiet background hum of dissatisfaction. Buying the nicer version interrupts that hum. It's not a luxury, it's a repair. Here's the third reason, and this one surprises people. Sometimes buying the expensive version of a cheap thing is actually the frugal choice. You've heard of the boot theory. It comes from a Terry Pratchett novel. The idea is simple.
A rich person buys a pair of boots for £50 that last 10 years. A poor person buys a pair of boots for £10 that last one season. Over 10 years, the poor person spends more money on boots while also being colder and wetter the entire time. This is not just a theory about poverty, it's a theory about how upfront cost hides long-term cost, and it applies to almost everything. A cheap toaster that burns your bread for 3 years before dying. A cheap mattress that ruins your sleep for half a decade. A cheap chair that makes your back ache every single day. You are not saving money on these items. You're paying a small amount repeatedly with your comfort, your time, and your health. The expensive version is not expensive, it's just priced honestly. People who buy expensive versions of cheap things have usually learned this lesson the hard way. They have done the math on replacement cycles. They have calculated the hourly cost of a tool that fails. They have realized that buying something once for $100 is cheaper than buying something 4 times for $30 each. This is not status seeking, this is pattern recognition, and one of the most financially sophisticated behaviors there is. But here's the part most people miss, and this is where money becomes emotional in a way that has nothing to do with logic. The brain does something unexpected here. It starts to attach meaning to the objects that work reliably. That brass pen becomes a companion. That heavy pan becomes part of your rhythm. That expensive coat becomes a kind of armor you put on before leaving the house. And then, slowly, you stop being able to imagine the cheap version. The cheap version feels wrong, not because it's low quality, because it's not yours. You have bonded with the object, and that bond changes everything. This is why people get defensive about their expensive versions. It's not about the money anymore. It's about the relationship, and relationships are not rational. Now here's something else worth noticing. The same person who buys expensive versions of cheap things will often be incredibly cheap about other things. They will drive a 10-year-old car. They will wear the same sneakers for 5 years. They will reuse plastic bags. This is not inconsistency. This is prioritization. They have learned that some things matter and some things don't. And they have learned that the things that touch you directly, the things you hold, sit on, sleep in, and wear against your skin, those things earn back their cost in ways that never show up on a receipt. This behavior changes as life changes. In your 20s, buying the expensive version might feel like pretending. You don't yet trust your own taste. You worry people will see through you. In your 30s, you start to buy 1 or 2 nice things and you notice how different they feel. In your 40s, you stop apologizing. You've replaced the cheap cutting board 3 times. You're done. In your 50s and beyond, buying the expensive version isn't even a decision anymore. It's just how you live. The behavior doesn't disappear. It evolves. It becomes quieter, less self-conscious, more certain. What you're really doing when you buy the expensive version of a cheap thing is regulating your emotional environment. Every object in your home is either adding to your peace or subtracting from it. A drawer that opens smoothly adds peace. A knife that cuts cleanly adds peace. A light switch that feels solid adds peace. These are tiny increments, but peace is not built in large blocks. It's built in thousands of small, solid, reliable moments. The expensive version is not a purchase. It's a small investment in not being irritated tomorrow morning. And that is not shallow. That is sanity. Here's where you can rest. You are not materialistic. You are not wasteful. You are not bad with money. You are someone who learned, probably the hard way, that cheap things cost more than money. They cost attention. They cost mood. They cost the small, quiet dignity of owning a tool that doesn't betray you. You are not buying status. You are buying relief from a kind of low-grade suffering that most people don't even have words for. And that is not a failure of discipline. That is the hard-won wisdom of having been disappointed enough times to finally trust yourself. Keep the nice scissors. Keep the pen that clicks right. You figured something out, and that is worth more than what you paid.